This is Fortress on a Hill with Henry, Danny, Kagan, Giovanni, Shiloh, Anisha, and Mike.
Welcome, everyone, to Fortress on a Hill, a podcast about U.S. foreign policy, anti-imperialism, skepticism, and American way of war. I'm Giovanni, speaking with you today. Thank you for joining us. And as of this recording, we are entering the third week of the U.S.-Israel war of aggression against Iran, following the killing of Ayatollah Khomeini, leader of the Iranian Revolution and spiritual leader of Shia Islam. This attack shattered what had been described by Omani intermediaries as positive negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. Just hours later, the cowardly surprise attack by Israel and the U.S. ignited a regional war. What has initially presented by the Trump administration as an incursion that would last only 4 days has extended into a full-blown war with no projected end date, threatening the global economy and international stability. Iran's resistance, retaliation, appear to have caught the war makers by surprise. They now seem to have no plan and working on the fly. The decapitation of Iranian leadership was expected to spark an uprising, regime change, or simply plunge the country into chaos, as has happened in so many places where Western-backed regime change has occurred. Instead, the Iranian people have proven resolute and defiant, supportive of their army and leadership in the face of their attackers' unscrupulous violence. This war is a culmination of a decades-long obsession with toppling the Iranian government. Dating back to 1979, plans to degrade and defeat Iran have openly strategized, including in a 2019 Brookings Institution paper, Which Path to Persia? Options for a New American Strategy Towards Iran. For years, Benjamin Netanyahu has sought a U.S. president to make this fantasy of war with Iran a reality. He appears to have found one in Trump. Let's discuss this further with Medea Benjamin.
Hey, great to be with you, Giovanni.
Great to be with you, Medea. Medea is a co-founder of the women-led peace group Code Pink. She's also a co-founder of the human rights group Global Exchange, the Peace in Ukraine Coalition, Unfreeze Afghanistan, which advocates for the returning of $7 billion in Afghan funds frozen in American banks, ACERE, the Alliance for Cuban Engagement and Respect, and the Nobel Peace Prize for Cuban Doctors Campaign. Welcome back, Medea.
Hey, good to be with you.
Interesting times, right?
Crazy times, deja vu, huh?
Deja vu, right? The famous quote saying that there are decades and nothing happens, and there are days that decades happen. It seems like the last 14 months, like years have gone by.
Yeah, I can't believe that Trump's second term has not even been 2 years yet. It seems like a lifetime.
And so, like we talked about, like I mentioned in the intro, we're now entering the third week of this war. What sense you make of it? What's the game plan here, and what do you think about this?
I'm just gobsmacked. I'm just amazed that the US had the stupidity and the hubris to actually attack Iran. I never thought they would do it. I thought people in the Pentagon would say, no way, this doesn't make any sense. But of course, with Pete Hegseth as the Secretary of War, I guess he feels invincible, as does Trump. And they've gotten themselves into a horrible quagmire with no strategy, no exit plan, no support from the US public, and yet they're going further and further into it. I'm reading today that they're sending a 2,500 Marine Expeditionary Unit to the region. They're ramping up instead of ramping down. So I have no idea where Trump thinks this is going to go. I just wish that he would declare victory and end this, but it doesn't look like he's going to do that, and it doesn't look like the Iranians are going to accept that.
Yeah, I'm wondering where those 2,500 Marines going to go and where they're going to stay, given that a lot of the bases around Iran has been evacuated due to the missile retaliation attacks.
Well, they're supposedly going to help open up the Strait of Hormuz, which has been mined, and already the ships are not wanting to go through there. They have been, I heard they had been offered U.S. Navy escorts, and they said no, they'd rather not even go because that would make them such a target. Yes, what these new forces are going to do, God only knows. And this idea that potentially there could be a U.S. ground invasion is just so disheartening Giovanni, we've been through this in Iraq, we've been through this in Afghanistan. We know that there is no winning. There's no winning now. There's no winning if US troops. There'll only be more US soldiers dead. And I hope that this is enough of a crazy warning that people will start voicing their opposition, the opposition that we hear or we read about in the opinion polls, but hasn't been translated into the large demonstrations we had leading up to the Iraq War.
I was going to ask you about that. I remember that there were cities, there was a millions of people around the world in multiple cities in the United States, a lot of mobilization to as opposition to the Iraq war. Before it even started, there were people mobilizing. And this time around, you don't see that same energy. Here where I'm at, we organized a protest here, and there was like 70 something people showed up. What do you think? Why does this happen?
I think there's multiple reasons for that, Giovanni, and some of them are that the Iranian regime is not one that people want to be seen as supporting. And they think if they go out to demonstrations, that will be seen as support for a regime that has cracked down on its people and killed a lot of people who are protesting. In the lead up to the Iraq war, we thought that we could stop the war. And there was a long lead up, whereas this just happened so quickly, we didn't have time to organize before the invasion took place. I also think we have to put it in the context of years of people being out on the street around Gaza and feeling so defeated because we went out over and over and over and over again, and Israel still continues to do what it wants to do, not only in Gaza, but now in the Middle East and in Lebanon. I think there's the domestic issues that so many people have been out protesting ICE. And the corollary to that is that many people are afraid. If they're in the immigrant community, they're fearful of ICE. If they're not in the immigrant community, but they have been subjected to oppression for being out there supporting the immigrant community, people feel afraid. So I think it's frustration, it's fear, it's all of those things together. Whatever it is, it's not good. On the opinion polls, we see overwhelmingly the American public does not support this war. And that is something very important and should be reflected in votes in Congress. It is to some extent, but not enough. But that anti war sentiment has to also be reflected in other ways, like big demonstrations on the street, like people expressing their outrage, calling their members of Congress and say, you are spending $1 billion a day when there are so many needs at home and in a war that was unprovoked, should have never have started. And now the administration is supposedly going to ask for another $50 billion on top of the $1 trillion military budget. So people should be outraged, and we've got to help them get to that point.
I know that the war, the current war, it happened after last year's also surprise attack, the 12-day war. This time around, it was preceded under cover. It was started under the cover of protest, where it was admitted that the currency was manipulated. There was this huge inflation. People came out to protest the inflation. Then at the same time, there were filtration by the Kurds, the MEC, and everything, right, coming in as well. So it turned into like this chaos, like we've seen in other places like Venezuela, in Ukraine, and whatnot, where we're under the cover of people protesting, right? These elements come in and they just start pretty much just blowing up and attacking and burning things up. So this conflict was preceded by this effect. And then things calm down. Then we have the delegations, Oman being the intermediary. He was saying that everything was nice, everything was good. They have the United States and Iran was coming into terms. Iran, I think, made some concessions also in accordance to his nuclear project and everything. And next thing you know, poof, we had this thing just blow up. And what I'm hearing is that they had the idea that if they just did a decapitation strike, similar to the kidnapping of President Maduro in Venezuela, that were going to shock the Iranian government, the Iranian people into paralysis, and nothing would have happened. Do you read the same thing? Do you think that was realistic, that was going to happen?
It's so unrealistic, and anybody who knows anything about Iran knows how unrealistic it is. Iran really has a multi-layered system, whereas you can kill off top leaders, and there's another layer, and then you can kill them off, and then you have another layer, and this goes down and down. And that's the Iranians have been readying themselves for a long time for this war. So they have built up these kind of structures. It is totally unrealistic to think that you could have taken out the Ayatollah and the whole regime would have collapsed. Now, it's important to think about what are the goals of Israel versus the United States, and I think they're different. I
Mm,
think for Israel, they definitely want regime change, and in fact, maybe they want it to turn into chaos,
mhm,
internal strife, one group fighting another, a weakened Iran maybe broken up into sub-states. That is
mhm,
something that Israel would like to see happen. I think the US is less interested in seeing chaos in Iran and therefore chaos in the region, but really doesn't have a strategy, followed Israel into this war, which is why it's so important whenever we talk about this to say this is an unprovoked war for make Trump really seem like he is following the leadership of another country. Because one, I think that's what happened. And two, if Trump decides that he's had enough and wants to declare victory and pull out, the Israelis are going to be there to say no, 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 no. And we have to be there to say yes, 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 yes. We also have to tie it to AIPAC and the strong Israel lobby that exists in the United States that has captured our government. You know, I spend a lot of time in Congress going every single week, and it's
mhm,
amazing how many of the members of Congress not only take large amounts of money from AIPAC, but do Israel's bidding. And
mm,
that's certainly true of the Republican Party, that is also afraid of Trump and afraid of standing up against him, even though the Republican base, especially the young people in the Republican base, are very much against this. But it's true on the hawkish side of the Democratic Party as well, where you have leadership like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries speaking out of both sides of their mouth. And when this $50 billion comes up to give Trump more money for this war, I wouldn't bet that the Democrats would get together and say no collectively.
yeah, a couple points there. I'll say it. Some of these Congress people actually served in the IDF as well.
Brian
Which is
Mast,
yeah,
head
which is
of
interesting.
the right, on the House side, the head of foreign relations.
But a couple of things that you pointed out there, right? Let me go back to the different interest. What is the U.S. interest? What is Israel's interest here? So you go back to Brzezinski with his grand chessboard, right? Talked about control over the Eurasia. The United States needs to control Eurasia. You have Wolfowitz in the doctrine of Wolfowitz back in '92, saying that the United States do not tolerate any challenge to U.S. primacy. You have the Project for the New American Century, which talked about extending U.S. dominance indefinitely. So you have all these goals back in the 90s, etc., right, to maintain unipolar polarity, right? Unipolarity. Now a lot of many analysts saying that we're moving towards multipolarities. Even Rubio in a speech acknowledged that the world is no longer unipolar, now it's multipolar. Pepe Escobar called it multinodal. And Vijay Prashad doesn't agree. He feels that we're going into hyper capitalism and hyper imperialism. All this, right, to say that we're seeing this from the '90s onward, this continuity of policy. We see in Obama when Bush going into West Asia, then Obama talking about pivot to Asia after about 20 years in fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. Is the current drive, in your opinion, to bring down Tehran actually really a way to get to China, in your opinion? Because China right now is the leading contender or the leading challenge to U.S. at least economic primacy in the world.
Well, yes, certainly the China is the number one purchaser of Iranian oil, so it does hurt them. But I think it's also important to look at the national strategy doctrine that the Trump administration put out that talked about basically a pivot to Latin America,
Mhm,
talked about a revival of the Monroe Doctrine, really the Donroe Doctrine.
mhm,
And we see that with the meeting that they had in South Florida recently, bringing together 17 heads of states, the right wing heads of states throughout Latin America, under the pretext of combating drugs. We see it in the way they kidnapped Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, in Venezuela, and have force the Venezuelans to give concessions to U.S. oil companies as well as gold. We see it in the strangling of Cuba and the really vicious efforts to topple that government. So that's why I think we have to acknowledge different goals between Israel and the Trump administration, whereas I think the Trump administration would have been happy to not spend so much time and energy and resources in the Middle East and employ them elsewhere. But here we are, and it seems like Trump is just going down this path of getting deeper and deeper into the hellhole of war. When he says it's going to be quick, the markets revive. And then when he says this is going to be long war, they're down in the dumps. We know that the prices of gas at the pump are going up. And if it keeps going up, I think there will be a lot more visible opposition to this war than we're seeing right now.
So I know you mentioned how AIPAC is also influencing, but you also have, and I think Hezbollah is one of this camp of the Christian fundamentalism as well in driving this policy in West Asia. We just saw recently complaints from soldiers and troops saying that the commanders are framing this conflict in religious terms, like we're heading to Armageddon, and they're embracing it. So there's multiple influence and layers in this thing here. I don't know what to call it.
Insanity, you can call it. And yes, this Christian insanity that this is part of leading to the Armageddon. And so it's God's will, and Trump is anointed by Jesus. I go into Congress every single week, and if people get a chance to watch some of the videos on social media, you'll see some of these crazy interactions, like one I had this week with Senator Kramer, who has a big Israeli flag outside of his office in
Uh,
Washington, D.C. And when I talked to him and said, "Is this a war for Israel?" he said, "We have a biblical obligation to Israel." So these are people that are supposed to represent their states, their districts, that are giving away over $1 billion a day to this war for biblical obligations that we have to Israel. It's really hard to counter when they go this biblical route.
yeah, and they seem so like when you look at them, they seem like so crazy, some crazy eyes as well. I've seen those videos with those Congress people. I mean, it's just outrageous. Just they feel like they're like unhinged.
Absolutely. In fact, the only thing they can say in response to our questions is that we are funded by the Chinese Communist Party
I
and that
heard
we
that.
are friends with Xi and with Putin. Rick Scott asked me, look me in the eye, like very evilly, and say, "Are you an Iranian citizen?" Such ridiculous baby stuff instead of facing up to the fact that they are supporting Trump in this unwinnable, reckless, dangerous war. Who didn't say beforehand that this would spread beyond Iran to the entire region and affect the Strait of Hormuz and the price of oil? It was said by all kinds of analysts and even government people. You wonder what kind of intelligence, in quotes, they go on when they allow themselves to be dragged into something that is already a regional war that is hurting our interests.
So Medea, so we're going back to Israel and what's their gambit here? I mean, there's different goals. They have I mean, for years, Netanyahu, I think he's been prime minister ever since. It seems like he's always been there to me, right?
In this great democracy, guys never
Right.
leave.
Yeah, see, I can't, it seems like he's always been there, I can't remember anybody else but him. But they've been pushing for this war for years. 4 years. They've been, I mean, including Bush too. They were pushing him to go to Iran, they were pushing for years, and they have an obsession like with Iran. And like you say, they don't really, and their obsession is not to fight them on their own because they want the US to fight for them. There's this thing now that's coming out more and more about the Greater Israel Project. What can you tell me about this Greater Israel Project? And does this have something to do with what we're seeing right now, the war against Iran?
Well, Iran has been supporting resistance movements in the region, supporting Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas. Israel is using the pretext of Iran getting a nuclear weapon, which is so ironic because Israel is the one that has the nuclear weapons. In
Right.
fact, many people are very fearful right now that they would use a tactical nuclear weapon against Iran because the war is not going the way they would
Right.
like it to.
Right. They've been getting a
And
nuclear weapon for the last 20 years. It's been like around the corner, about a couple of days from now.
absolutely. And we had a nuclear deal
Right.
signed in 2015 that guaranteed that there were inspectors. And, you know, when Trump goes and rips that up, and then twice we talked about the negotiations and this war starting in the midst of negotiations. But let's remember that happened twice in the last year. It happened back in June when there were negotiations, bombing the negotiators. And then it happens again. So obviously, it's not about nuclear weapons and negotiating. It's about Israel wanting to get rid of a neighbor that has not been in lockstep with Israel's oppression. We see what they're doing now to Lebanon. You know, there's over 500,000 displaced people in the last few weeks in Lebanon because Israel decided that it would demand that all the people in southern Lebanon just get out of there. You know, Iran has been standing up to Israel, and Israel wants to get rid of that.
Bahrain just introduced a UN resolution this week or yesterday, I believe, where it condemns Iran only for this war, for attacking its neighbors and stuff like that. It doesn't mention anything about Iran being attacked and retaliating to the attack. It just condemns Iran only. Why are these Arab countries, these monarchies and so forth, including the leadership in Lebanon, why are they so submissive to Israel and the United States?
Well, they are lackeys of the United States. They have US bases. They made a deal with the devil, and that was, excuse me, sorry,
It's
for
all right.
supposed protection. The US would bases would be there to protect these undemocratic, mostly monarchies in these countries. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia. The US complains about unfair elections in certain countries. There's never been an election in Saudi Arabia or in these other Gulf states. They're really, the protection is mostly against their own people. And we see that in Bahrain right now, where the majority Shia have been ruled by a very oppressive Sunni government. And when the Iranians hit a US base in Bahrain, there were people in Bahrain who were celebrating that. So these monarchies, these right wing repressive governments in the Gulf, have been protected by having US bases, or thought they would. And now it turns out that they realize that having the US bases there actually makes them a target. So you just wonder, as this all plays out, are they having second thoughts about being so closely aligned with the United States? And might there be some major realignments afterwards, depending on how this all shakes out,
Mhm.
of not wanting to have US bases, of not wanting to have such close military ties with the United States?
When all this is over, however it ends, in your view, what will be the balance of power look like in West Asia?
I hope this doesn't end in a nuclear apocalypse, because then we won't even be around to discuss it. I think that Iran will be weaker militarily, but actually stronger socially, because there's more unity right now in Iran, certainly, than there's been in a very divided society. And now there's much more sense of nationalism and opposition to an outside force that came in and on the first day blew up a girls' school. I mean,
Mhm.
how can you be celebrating a US invasion if they're killing civilians like we're doing and blowing up infrastructure that everybody needs, whether you're for or against the present government? So I don't think this government is going to fall. I think that Israel is just losing, absolutely losing any kind of ability to have these accords with its Arab neighbors, the Abraham Accords, where it was making nice with the Arab neighbors. And Saudi Arabia was about to do that when the Gaza genocide started, and now they're even further away from that. So Israel is losing power. Israel is losing whatever legitimacy it had. I mean, it still has it, unfortunately, among leadership in the United States and in Western Europe, that's been so awful in this as well. But in the long run, I think it's terrible for the people of Israel, who should have been rising up against the genocide in Gaza and unfortunately never did that.
Indeed, it was unfortunate, and not only they didn't rise, when I did the polls,
Opinion polls, yeah.
the opinion polls, like 80% supported it. So
Yeah, like high 70s, had no concern. They weren't worried about what was happening in Gaza. And you just think, what happens to people? How do they get to that point where their humanity has been erased?
Indeed. Well, I think this is a good place to wrap up today. Medea, thank you again for coming on the show, sharing your thoughts, time, experience. Any final comments before we go?
Well, we talked about how unfortunate it is that there hasn't been a big anti-war movement that we can see in the streets. But I think we have to build one. And you, Giovanni, are connected to a lot of veterans who are against this war. We were just with Brian McGinnis, the Marine veteran who spoke out in the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing and had his arm broken.
How's he
And there
doing,
was
by the way?
He's doing good, and the response has been millions and millions of people supporting him. And so I think an incident like that shows just how people are ready to rise up. They just need to be pushed. So our organizations have to get stronger, have to work together, have to really get out there, because otherwise we're going to see U.S. troops on the ground. We're going to see lots of U.S. service people being killed in Iran. Things are going to get a heck of a lot worse if we don't make those public opinion polls translate into street power, into angry calls to our members of Congress, into town hall meetings where we say, hell no, not another penny for this war. We have to make our opposition felt by the people who are supposed to represent us.
You mentioned earlier Democrats and how they're just standing on the sideline. And my suspicion is that they want everything to fall on Trump because they're looking at it as a political victory for them for the next election cycle.
Absolutely. And, they don't care about the people's lives in Iran. They care about the politics of it all. And that's why we see sometimes the Democrats coming at Trump from the right, like they did in Venezuela, and said, wait, you didn't do regime change. Or Ukraine, you're not giving enough support for Ukraine. You're negotiating. That's not right.
Mhm.
Or they're saying, in this case of Iran, well, you got rid of the Ayatollah, but you didn't accomplish regime change. So we can't trust the Democrats. That's why the pressure that we have to put on those who are supposed to represent us have to be both on the Republicans as well as the Democrats. And certainly there are some Democrats who are good. Bernie Sanders has been excellent on this. Some of the other senators have been good. They've come out of these closed door briefings and said that they were appalled by what they heard, that there is no exit strategy. The House have been good as well, introducing war powers resolutions. So there are some good ones, but they will all be much better if they hear from us as angry U.S. citizens saying this war should never have started and must be stopped immediately.
Indeed. Where can we find you, Medea?
So I'm at Code Pink. It's codepink.org. Please look us up. Join this growing movement. Like the veterans groups, we now have chapters all over the country, and we encourage people to join whatever group that you feel comfortable with and just be more involved, more out there, leave your comfort zone, and just make sure they hear from us.
There you have it, folks. Look up Medea, watch her videos, watch her challenge the Congress people, watch how stupid she makes them look. And thank you guys for joining us. I look forward to seeing you again, Medea. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanni. Good to be on with you.
Money is tight these days for everyone. Penny pinching to make it through the month often doesn't give people the funds to contribute to a creator they support. So we consider it the highest honor that folks help us fund the podcast in any dollar amount they're able. Patreons is the main place to do that. In addition, any support we receive makes sure we can continue to provide our main epistos free for everyone. And for supporters who can donate $10 a month or more, they will be listed right here as an honorary producer, like these fine folks. Fahim's Everyone Dream, Eric Phillips, Paul Appel, Julie Dupree, Thomas Benson, Janet Hansen, Ren Jacob, Scott Spalding, Spooky Tooth, Helgeberg, and Howard Reynolds. However, if Patreon isn't your style, you can contribute directly through PayPal at paypal.me/Fortress on a Hill. Or please check out our store on Spreadshirt for some great Fortress merch.
We're on Twitter and Facebook.com @Fortress on a Hill. You can find our full collection of episodes www.fortressonahill.com. Skepticism is one's best armor. Never forget it. We'll see you next time.
Come on, you good people, listen to my song. I hope you'll pay attention. I will not take you long.
www